worked at NECAS. I know Tanya, the staff there were amazing. And there are so many other people that I admire and, deserve it. And, maybe more so than I do. And sometimes it's just, someone nominates you and you're lucky that they take the time to do that for you. So thank you. I appreciate it. And, there are many, many teachers in this district that deserve to be up here.
Thank you, Mr. V. You're very generous and very modest. Thank you so much for being here. And actually, one of our board members has her hand raised, so you might have to go back up to the microphone.
This is very informal.
Okay, sure.
I just wanted to welcome a fellow Brit.
Where are you from?
I was born outside of London. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all you do for our district.
Thank you so much for being here. We are going to move next into the superintendent's report for the evening, so I will turn it over to Superintendent Dowd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to come on up. So as we've been talking about the strategic plan, it's November. This is the draft goals. And so this is a time for us to share what the staff, families, and students have provided in foundationally starting the strategic plan. And each of the areas are led by a focus area group. And so I'm going to have them share their areas as we go. Just again, a nice visual of our new strategic plan visual. And as we think of the three areas, the first one is achieving academic success. And I've shared this at previous board meetings, but I'm going to repeat it one more time. The input that was provided specifically from students, staff, and families, we felt we had to honor each of those perspectives in our statements around what does achieving academic success mean. And so when the strategic plan is completed, students, this will be the end statement, as students meet their individualized academic goals, staff demonstrate the knowledge and skills to provide a culturally responsive education, and families, caregivers are empowered through collaborative partnerships and resources to support students in reaching their academic goals. And so the next area is cultivating equity inclusion. Again, I won't read it, but you'll see the pattern of the statements that we've talked about and shared with you before. And our last area is promoting social emotional learning. And again, the statements of when we complete this, this is what we should reach at. So we said, if this is the end game, where do we start? And we had to have courageous conversations about where do we start. And so that's what you'll learn. And you'll, when you think about our goals, it is where, how we always think about perception. Where do we want to be, but where are we really at in order to actually annually meet these goals? And so that's what we will talk about tonight. Pass it over to Dr. Elizabeth Lodge Rogers.
When we've had the opportunity to meet with staff who volunteered, and we had a lot of folks that wanted to be on our work teams. We didn't want them to be too big so that we could get some work done too. But it's a really nice representation across our district. Those staff interacted with information that we got that we received from students and caregivers around what would this look like. So we had those theme areas. What would this look like for you as a student? And we collated that information, brought our staff in, and then that's where we began the process of drafting goals. And for what you'll see here tonight are our draft goals that look at year one implementation, as well as the shorter term goal, 6 months of what do we need to get done to be ready to leap into year one implementation of that round. So I think Marcy's going to talk a little bit about our achieving academic success goals.
So our executive, Ben, our executive director of leadership and learning, leads this group. He's unable to be here tonight, so I said I would fill in. So from the student side, again, that 6-month goal is really identifying, we know that an assessment, one assessment for all of our students would not be appropriate. That we really do have to identify ways in which we are going to assess progress in each of the tiered programs. And we have some assessments, but not a comprehensive for all. And so what we are really going to work on is making sure that we have a literacy and a math assessment that's accessible for all the students that we serve, and direct professional development for our staff for implementation. So we do have bridge, we do fast testing, but we also need to find assessments that are supported for some of our tier 3 programs. And then in starting the fall, besides, I'll help you go back once, starting the fall, once the professional development is done, it really is that each student has an academic target. And the reason why we didn't necessarily pull out math and reading in this language is that some students might have a math and reading academic target, some might have a reading academic target. So it really is about what does that student need individualized, and that 80% of the students will meet their growth target based on the assessment identified. From the staff side, we really talked about what the staff pre-COVID, everything's on the COVID timeline, but pre-COVID, the staff was really working on a guide to say, how do we utilize all of our adults, ESPs, licensed teachers, related service providers, collectively around supporting academic growth? And what's everybody's role in that? And so we were, they were defining kind of what's the role of an ESP around small group instruction, around large group instruction. That's, our ESPs are there for behavioral support as well as academic support, and defining what that looks like. So they started it, COVID came and really disrupted the progress, and wanted to reground themselves and saying, as an ESP then, what's your role in collaborative planning time? What's the structure in which we give dedicated time to staff to talk about planning around students? And being very intentional about it. So redeveloping that collaborative planning guide, and then next year launching, and really during the scheduled collaborative planning time for all of licensed teachers, related service providers, and ESPs, really showing evidence. They have templates and talking about what's my role, your role, and how do we together support instruction and behavior in the classroom. And then using that scheduled time to talk about professional development, maybe a literacy strategy or something that they're working individually with the students. And so it is being more intentional about the roles and equalizing those roles in instruction. For the parent side, one thing that we talked about is in your traditional district, you might use Skyward, Campus, whatever your system is, and how you communicate progress, your child's progress and or students' progress. That's different here. So progress for all of our programs could look very different. Communication for all of our programs could look very different. A grade in synergy could be very meaningful for one program, but daily communication between the school and family to support a student that hasn't yet have a consistent mode of communication is just as important. And so what we really wanted to talk about is what our family said to us and our caregivers said to us is, this is what I need for communication, not what are you going to do to us, but this is what would help me. And so when we really think about family engagement, it starts with, how do we currently communicate with families, and is that enough? Yes, we have IEP meetings. Yes, you can put it on a grade on synergy, but our family said, no, we want something different. And so really kind of saying, where are we? Get more input from our families. And then as you're a new parent coming into District 287, we can say, here are the ways that we'll communicate with you through an IEP meeting, through quarterly progress reports, and here's some other ways that what would work best for you. And so right off the bat, we are really engaging in conversations with families and caregivers about how can we best communicate your child's progress and not necessarily the system's way of doing it. And so that is a lot of input from our families. So those would be the goals for the 6-month span, because we start January to June, and then launching next year of implementation. Questions on that part? There's a lot in each of these. There'll be nine goals, and do my math. But is any questions on the academic side before we pass it off? Go ahead.
So I have a couple.
Mhm.
When you're talking about making sure there's a comprehensive system to do assessments, are you going to reevaluate all the assessments that are being used today?
We will relook at the current assessments being used today.
And do you have a sense of what kind of assessments you might be able to source externally versus what might have to be developed?
And we have a good idea of that. We've been working on it this year.
And
So,
what's your sense? Are we going to be able to access some or?
yeah, so we'll access some. And then for our tier 3 programs, I anticipate, for some of our tier 3 programs, anticipating more curriculum-based measurements or developing other forms of formal progress monitoring.
Okay, and then in terms of goal setting for each student,
Mhm.
if the assessments being used for that particular student are sourced, if you will, or
Yep.
external,
Yep.
are you going to be using like benchmarks or
Growth
broader
charts.
data to help with that goal setting for that student?
Absolutely. So for example, we use FAST,
Yep.
and that'll project progress monitoring where they would be at the end of the year,
Yep.
or if they need to make year plus growth.
Yep.
What would that look like? And so then that'll be benchmarked through the way. So some of them will be already developed, might need to be, individualized, and then for our curriculum-based measurements, things that we develop, it'll also should tie to the IEP. What's
Mhm.
that progress we're looking for through the IEP goals and objectives?
Yep, and then the last question I have on this is in terms of communicating results, are you also going to be looking at the mechanisms you use to communicate results to the superintendents of the member districts?
Yes. And so last year, we provided an annual report of student progress.
Mhm.
We shared a dashboard regarding, and so that we will continue to do that annually. So our December meeting with the superintendents, they'll get their progress,
Mhm.
and they'll have progress monitoring along the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Question? No, yeah.
I just had a quick question to follow up. Is there any consideration when we're looking at these assessments of what would maybe align closely to a student's member district?
Yes.
Like looking toward that
Yes.
transitioning back in?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And getting, right? So if there was a fast assessment, we don't need to do that, right? We don't want kids to be doing multiple assessments. And so we are having conversations about what do you all use? And then how can we share back and forth? Yeah, great question.
That's wonderful. And the complexity of doing that across 12 districts, and then even the more districts that we know kids sometimes open and roll in, and like thinking
Mhm.
about care and treatment programs where kids are maybe sometimes there for a really short amount of time, like that's a lot. So I appreciate that it is a priority and that you're thinking it through. And I imagine the execution of that is going to be incredibly complex.
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
Any other questions on the academic goal? Okay.
All right, our next one is cultivating equity and inclusion, and our director of equity and inclusion leads this group.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, you did it for me. Thank you. The Cultivating Equity and Inclusion focus group really have fun visioning what it would look like for us to meet those statements. And so I believe that the goals that we have set in front of you are the foundations of that visioning process with that group. So our big 1 year goal would be that in order for students to have equitable access to all of the resources and opportunities that District 287 have, is that we would communicate them with all of our students. And so we would create a digital web-based tool that would sort of catalog all of the things that students can do here at District 287 in like a student portal almost. So that we'd like to see that at the end of next school year. In order for us to do that this year, we plan to do some engaging with our students to figure out what is it that could look like, that could be accessible to them, user-friendly, and have an appropriate interface. So right now, our catalog looks like, what I've seen is a bunch of courses on like a Google Sheet. Super overwhelming, right? That may work for them. I don't want to count it out for them, but our goal is that we engage with at least 40 students in our tier 2 programs in our academies, so that they can tell us what would be a useful interface so that we could properly communicate those opportunities and course offerings. That way we can start to look at what does access look like based on what students are interested in doing, regardless of what site or program they're attending. Next, for staff, our team thought a lot about what it would look like and mean to really celebrate the diversity of the staff and the students that are in all of our sites and programs. And they were really keen on the word celebrate. And that looked like an opportunity to learn, to experience, and maybe to watch, like really understanding the windows, mirrors, and sliding doors sort of theory around diversity. And so our 2-year goal is that all of our sites and programs would host at least 2 different types of events, so that people could, again, have windows, mirrors, and sliding doors, opportunities to celebrate in an asset-based way, right? All of the things that make folks unique and different, so have the opportunity to feel represented, but then also to learn about others. In order for us to do that work this year, we're actually in the process of creating a calendar. And I know maybe you've seen them in the board updates, right? That will say, November is Native American Heritage Month, which it is. And then we've been providing our staff with resources, and they've already been thinking about ways to incorporate some of these things in their classroom. So we hope that this year we can compile a calendar of different observances, resources, and recognitions from different cultures and other social identities that are relevant and representative of our staff and of our students. And then we'd be able to share that. And then that our equity teams would be able to help sort of facilitate that engagement and that resource sharing within their sites and programs. And then, so our last goal for parents and caregivers, the team thought, what is necessary? What needs to be true if our families and caregivers will feel seen, heard, and valued? And they believe that the first step to our what is required of the district is that we are able to respond and collaborate with our families and caregivers as they can best advocate and support and be empowered through our relationships for their students. In order for them to do that, we need to make sure that we are providing them the information for their students in the language that they understand. And so this work, the 1-year goal is that we provide culturally relevant and appropriate translating resources and interpreting services, and build some consistent standards of usage and practice for our staff, so that we know that we're sending out communication that's not only translated, but again, culturally appropriate. So this year, that work will look like conducting an audit of recognizing what languages do we need to provide for our families, and then also looking at the work that's been given, that ensuring that the translations are appropriate, that there's things that maybe they're translations and interpretations that aren't necessarily textbook, like a word for word, but really speak to the nuance of academic language and sometimes jargon. So sometimes that that doesn't necessarily come off in a way that's understandable, or the words that we use in English to describe them, you wouldn't in the other language. And so when parents read them, it doesn't make sense even in their own language, right? So this year we'll be digging into that and seeing how accessible even our translated and interpreted materials are for our families. That's what we have. Any questions?
I know what windows and mirrors are, but not sliding doors.
Sliding doors are experiences. So imagine that you have a indoor, outdoor living arrangement, right? And I could slide the door from my home into my outside, and it's a completely different experience, right? So a window and a mirror, there's not necessarily an interaction. If we have performances, or if we had a cultural experience within our building, you'd be able to experience that's the sliding door. Yes.
Michael.
I was curious, even though you're gonna do an audit this year, I'm just curious, do we have a sense right now of how many different languages we're needing to serve or currently serving today?
Yeah, I'm really glad that I talked to Camille about this right before our meeting. Our current practice is that we translate in the 3 most represented languages, which are English, Spanish, and Somali. So clearly we want to conduct the audit to see if there's any gaps there to make sure that that's represented, representative of the gross majority of our students. But
And then is it aimed at not just in the instructive translation of things that are going on, but beyond that too, right? Like if you have a child that's in the building, a student that's in the building, and their native language is one of whatever we're going to audit to figure out, are we providing translation services across more than just in the curriculum kind of areas, but in the actual, if we're doing care and treatment, if we're doing other kind of things, are we also providing services in that way, or is it mostly just in the written form?
thus far, I believe it's mainly in the written form and talking about formal parent communications is our current practice. I have yet to see us like where we have one-to-one translators or interpreters for students. Most of the time, we leverage bilingual staff when students are in classrooms and they don't have or they are growing proficiency in spoken English, right? That if bilingual staff are available, then we leverage them in that regard. But I wouldn't say it's systematic at this point. But I think again, an audit allows us to see what are the needs, and then we can think about how do we develop structures to
That's
be
where my question
responsive.
was going,
Yeah.
was making sure beyond just the textual communication,
Yeah.
are we seeing the actual day-to-day servicing to where if being bilingual or having something there would be additive to
Mhm.
the goals that you just described in the previous one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing
And
what
then-
that is,
Yeah.
then allows us to figure out, okay, how could we enable that?
Yes.
Even though
and,
that's a tall order to enable it, but like, that might be what's called for. If we want to
yeah.
hit our goals.
Well, I think that's why we come back every year, and between years in 2, 3, like year 2, 3, 4, and 5, we get to say, what did we learn this year? And then what do we need to do differently? As long as it's a part of the trajectory. But I think that we continue to gather information. We continue to learn and see what sorts of opportunities to better serve our students exist.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Director Bergman, as you shared about the connection to the previous caregiver, you'll see these will work in tandem, right? So when we talk about what modes of communication are we going to share in regards to student progress, this goal will come together with that. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now Dr.
Dr.
Tanya Allen will present our social emotional. She leads this group.
Yes. So our group was really passionate about looking at social emotional learning, obviously because of the needs of our students and how can we be much more proactive around social emotional learning with our students. We had really big lofty goals, and then we had to trim them down to what's realistic in this time frame. So what we really looked at was making sure that as we move forward and think about what do we want to do with social emotional learning curriculum, we have a ton of resources. However, as you can imagine, with turnover and just different things that happen, really narrowing the focus so that you're really good at a few things versus having 25, 30 different offerings is really critical. So part of what we will do that first 6 months is really involve students and participating in the selection of what that curriculum looks like, and then making sure that we provide some professional development for staff that's around those selected curriculum. And our goal that following year is that 80% of our tier 2 elementary and middle school, as well as academy students, will be developing their own social emotional learning goal, self-monitoring progress, and then conferencing with staff. And we chose that group because you may say, well, that's not everybody. We really tried to look at some of the data around which students, all of our students need it clearly, but which students could we target and focus? And as you've heard, our tier 3 needs are very different than our tier 2 needs. And that's part of why we looked at having that group be maybe part of what would be year 2 versus what would be year 1. And our elementary and middle school in particular, because when we look at some of our critical incident and restricted procedure data, that's where we're seeing the highest level of incidences. And so that need for being proactive is there. And our academy students, because many of those students are students that could be in many of your home districts in those programs, but are not. And so that's a very good group to look at and a group that is always typically very vocal and can be part of that group that helps provide some of the feedback needed to help with the participation of what we select as we move forward. So those are the groups that we are targeting as we start the process with our students. When we look at staff, we had multiple things for this area as well. It was the group we had to kind of trim things down. One of the things that the staff talked about the most was that we need to do a better job of making sure that we are onboarding staff. And when you think about social emotional learning, adult SEL, that this area is a part of what we need to be looking at. And so part of our 6 months is really auditing what our current onboarding processes are, and then making a summary of recommendations around what is most essential. So as we think about what's happened at the legislature with some designated money for at least for new paraprofessionals, and even when we think about people that are coming in mid-year that don't have the benefit of our new staff academy program, what do we really want to make sure they have to go into these classrooms and support the students? So what our goal is by June 30th of 2025, that we would have a universal onboarding system for new staff that has mentoring and a minimum of 8 hours of things like understanding disabilities, mental health, trauma, and de-escalation. So making sure that those pieces that we need to make sure staff are aware of to make sure that they're able to support student social emotional learning are evident as well. And last but not least, our parents and caregivers. This was probably the most fun. We've gotten a lot of feedback from families. We've tried a lot of different things. Our group size is not your group size, but we were really excited. I actually got to see one of our parents right before this tonight. And the biggest piece that they gave us feedback was, how are we more involved? And we had the privilege of our last meeting. We had our one parent that was at our last session as we were developing and finalizing this. And one of the biggest things we've heard over and over again is, how can we be part of the District 287 community when we exist also in another community? And so part of what we focused on is that we would have a minimum of 4 community opportunities related to social emotional learning for parents and caregivers. And what we talked about was, they said, we want to learn more about the strategies that you use here in the school. How can that translate to home? So as those of you that were here when we had the Rhythm to Recovery, not saying every family is going to go out and buy a drum, but there are some different things that they can take from what's the importance of rhythm and how can that be used at home. Similar to Move Mindfully, how can I help to teach, how do I learn how to do mindful breathing at home, especially when those moments of stress come, and how do I help do that at home with my kids? So those are parts of what we're going to be focusing on. And our initial 6 months will be focusing on getting a summary of parent caregiver feedback on those suggested topics. So we narrow the focus. It could be lots of topics, but kind of narrow the focus for the first year of what those topics are like, and then go from there in terms of developing for the future. So those are the areas for promoting SEL.
Questions on that bucket?
I just want to say I'm really excited that you're involving students in selecting which one will be used. I think you all know I think that's excellent. So just wanted to call that out.
Thank you.
So Tanya, thank you, all of you. This is a wonderful start to a new year and a new strategic plan. The question I have is, how do we deal with the issue of getting our students to school? Because traditional schools, if I may call them that, we've had this problem forever, as long as I've been on here. And has that come up yet, or is it just simmering, or how?
Well, it definitely comes up. It is definitely an issue. And I do think that a big part of it is rebuilding a sense of community. And I think that as we can all see what's happening in our world today, I think that when we talk about some of those pieces around social emotional learning and what do we need to look at differently, not only from the student perspective, but from the adults that are supporting the student perspective, I think that that's the work that we're going to need to do to see the change with attendance. It's not the same strategies we used to use, because that doesn't work necessarily with this group of students. So I see a lot of us having to change what we thought were really effective, good interventions and strategies. We don't have, when I started years ago, I'll say that there was a heavy reliance on the county and truancy and all these systems, and that's dwindled to nothing. So it's really flipping and changing how we see things as the adults and working with students. And a lot of it comes down to, do I feel like I belong? I have a sense of belonging in the school and a sense of community when I come to the school. So a lot of the things that we think about with making sure that our staff know to do are some of the things that I think make a difference of, will I come back here or not? Will I only come 1 day a week, or will I actually come 3 days a week? And as one person told me, they said, Tanya, we can't discount. As much as we want to have 80-90% attendance, 80 or 90 for us is a big thing. 90 or above for everyone, I know. But for many of our students that were at 20% attendance, when they get to 50 here, even though that's not going to register as a win in many places, when we think about it overall, that is a win for them. And our hope is that if you go from 20 to 50 and you really build that strong sense of community, maybe I can go from 50 to 70. I may never hit 90. But if I'm building and growing and working towards that, building those stronger relationships and doing the things that I need to do to propel myself forward, I think that is a win. That is success. It may just not be the measure of success that MDE has for all of us, if that makes sense and helps to clarify.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a couple areas that we've been working with our groups and our leaders in parallel with this work in developing our goals has been to really dig into thinking about what are our values and what are our beliefs. As a core team, our mission statement of our district, which you read every board meeting, I love that, continues to be relevant and was affirmed. And so next we kind of took a look at what we value and believe, and in that process recognized that our belief statements mixed up values and beliefs a little bit, and I talked a little bit about that the last time we were here. So now we've landed on 4 values. We value inclusion as an organization, we value integrity, we value trust, and we value authenticity. We're wrestling with the belief statements that operationalize that and give us a sense of what does that look like? What does it mean across our students, our staff, and our families and community? So that's kind of where we are right now as we go into this first round of draft and presentation with you all. And so that's where we are, focusing on our goals, interested in feedback. In between this meeting and our next meeting, when Superintendent Dowd will be bringing a final strategic plan proposal to you, hopefully for approval, we expect that, is a little bit more work reviewing the goals one more time with our focus groups, our staff. We're gathering them back up November 27th, I think, something like that, or 28th. Next week, we're meeting with our instructional and operational leaders again. So that'll be part of it. And then also around the work we're doing with beliefs and belief statements related to that. So those are kind of our next steps. And that's where we are. I think one of our biggest challenges was to rein in our goals, because we all kind of went really big on year one and kind of had to remind ourselves, but we're talking about 5 years. And let's start with, yes, measurable, but attainable, and knowing that we get to have an iterative process as we monitor that progress, as we bring back that progress to our students, our staff, our families, to you all, to our other communities. So it's kind of where we are. Questions? Any of it?
Questions related to anything that we've talked about tonight?
Well done.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And I think the way that you all are thinking about it and approaching it is really compelling. The one thing I was going to say is I appreciated hearing just that the groups are really enthusiastic, right? That there's a lot of energy around taking these things on and coming up with what feel like the right goals. And like, as a board member, that just feels great, that this is rooted in what the people who are most proximate to this think we should be spending our time on, because that's not me. I don't have that proximity or that perspective. And so I love that this is being centered with those who do.
Well, I think it also goes to the point of the core values, right? Inclusion, integrity, trust, and authenticity. We can say those things. We could all say we want to be that, but the audiences that you just described, if they're the ones who are saying, yep, this is an inclusive process that with integrity, I trust what we're trying to do, and I feel it's authentic to what I'm saying, feeling, and needing, then you've literally executed exactly on what you said you were going to do. That might seem simple. That is not.
How often do you have to meet your team, the three of you?
We have a process team that we meet weekly, a large group, yeah, and sometimes in between.
Go work session.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
I just have to say thank you. This is a team effort, and that's, they're leading a lot of the work. It's been a heavy lift since we started the process, but I am too super proud of the work that our team has done, and Camille in the back too. Just really, it has been, it's weekly, sometimes twice a week, and then that's just us planning and prepping with focus, not even talking about the focus groups, and so it is definitely a team effort. This is a powerhouse of a team, and I'm grateful to be part of it. So thank you, team.
Thank you. We are going to build on that and move into our instructional report, which tonight is an update on our itinerant services program. So I'm excited to welcome up Amanda Cook, Assistant Director of Itinerant Services and Special Education, and Dr. Elizabeth Lamb, Senior Manager of Itinerant Services, to get an overview of the work that you all are doing. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Thank you very much. Good evening, Madam Chair and Superintendent Dowd, school board members. My name is Amanda Cook, and I am the Assistant Director of Special Education and Itinerant Services. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Lamb, and we're very thrilled to be here tonight to present to you our Itinerant Services update. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague.
Madam Chair, Superintendent Dowd, Board, and my colleagues, thank you again for this opportunity. We are very excited to present. So the objective today, we're going to describe the itinerant core values, look at the scope and services, and then describe how our division has tied this connective thread between itinerant service provision and literacy development to foster continued literacy growth. First, I also want to acknowledge Melissa Broading, the Director of Special Education, who has supported these efforts, the administrative assistants who are critical to our work, our program leads who support each one of the subcomponents within our division, and the full itinerant team. They are a powerhouse team, and I'm very honored to be able to work with them. So when we talk about core beliefs, we believe that core beliefs run deep, right? They are organic to who we are. They intersect with culture, language, societal expectation, and lived experiences. And we believe in the importance of storytelling, because I've found that that's a way to build connection with the itinerant team, the way to build connection with students, to hear their stories, to hear our stories. So to share about the itinerant division, we're going to begin with a story, one of my stories. So in the 1980s, when I was 2, I went to Gallaudet University, which is a college for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. So here I'm in preschool, one with a little blue dress, the red at the top, and all of my colleagues, the students that I was with were deaf and hard of hearing. My teacher was deaf as well. This is what school looked like for me, and this is how school began for me, in sign language, with deaf role models and deaf peers. A few years later, we had moved from Washington, D.C., and there was a huge civil rights movement on the ground of deafness. They were trying to elect a president for their university, and they had selected an individual who was not deaf, that the students believed was not as qualified as a deaf individual. And there was a strong civil rights protest. And when I was processing this with my mom, I couldn't figure out why we were protesting, because why would the president not be deaf? Why would that be? Why were we even talking about that? Because I saw all these deaf role models, so that didn't make sense. And I remember thinking, why is this so different than my lived experience? When I went to graduate school, Rochester Institute of Technology, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, again, it is a mecca for deaf and hard of hearing college students. Gallaudet and RIT are those two main meccas. And in those experiences, communication flexibility was normalized. Many individuals knew spoken English and many individuals knew sign language. We saw deaf researchers. We saw deaf scientists. This was normal part of being. The individuals we needed to support were individuals who didn't know sign language. And the individuals who knew both helped serve as that communication bridge. So again, deafness to me was a normal experience, and flexible environments was what I knew. Then luckily I was able to do an internship here at our very own District 287 in 2006, where I worked as a school psychologist specializing in the field of deafness. And there's a reason I came back to 287, because this belief was there and I could feel it, right? That communication was normalized, who you were, it was okay to be who you were. And so then I moved out of 287 and I saw another view that wasn't familiar to me. Deafness as the inability to hear. And I hadn't seen deaf people have an inability to do anything. So it didn't really make sense again. This way of thinking of, let's try to help this deaf student be part of this classroom and accommodate to them. They don't really fit and make it fit. I wasn't raised with that. I was raised with deaf friends. It just didn't make sense. But I started to realize that that was very pervasive and more common than my common experience. And that experience of seeing it from another view and thinking about my view informs how I lead and informs how our itinerant division does our work. So the itinerant division staff, we see and value the many ways to be deaf and hard of hearing. And it's asset-based and it's affirming. And it's not from the deficit stance. What are your strengths? What are your gifts? Let's leverage those and let's move. So for example, in the area of deaf, hard of hearing, we have speech and language pathologists, we have sign language interpreters, we have audiologists, we have deaf, hard of hearing teachers. And it is the combination of our work in that integrated way that helps us propel students forward, regardless of the student's language modality, regardless of if they use spoken language or not, their cultural background. We adjust to and fit for and honor who they are as individuals. And we believe that both the student and the environment need to be flexible communicators and create flexible learning environments. It makes me think of that value of inclusion, right? It's not enough to teach the student skills to navigate an environment that is inflexible. Our job is to navigate the environment and support the student and create learning. It's that both and situation. So we believe as an itinerant division that access is a prerequisite for belonging. If you don't have access, you can't belong. But yet, access alone is insufficient because you could still have a cochlear implant or you could still have a sign language interpreter, but that doesn't mean when you walk in the room, you feel whole. That just means you've walked in the room and you have an accommodation with you, right? To feel whole in a space, to not need to hide in that space, that's what belonging feels like for us. So our asset-based affirming stance is integrated in our service provision across all of our services. So my example was in the realm of deaf, hard of hearing, but it transcends all of the disability areas that we support. And next I'll show more about what are those disability areas. One thing I want to lift up is Amanda and I worked with our itinerant team and said, what are your core values? What propels you? Because if we could understand their core values and they could understand our core values, that's the propulsion. That is where we take risks. And if we can leverage those core values, that's where we can move. And so they lifted up kindness, access, respect, and value. And when I think about value, I think about value of self, but I also think about value of students and how do we add value? How is their life different because we were there? That was the question on the table. So with these core values at the forefront, with that grounding and that propulsion, who are we as an itinerant division? And what services do we provide and how do we add value? So we serve approximately 1,500 students. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of students. It's about 2 auditoriums. So the reach of the itinerant services, so maybe within your school, they come at certain times, but as a collective, there are many. So you may see one, but as a unit, there are many. We have the pleasure of supporting all of your member districts here and board members who also were not able to attend. And it is an honor, and the fact that you welcome us into our schools, you welcome us there. We are so excited. I was doing an observation the other day and they said hi to the secretary and they knew this person and they were part of the fabric. And that was really cool to see. We also serve students within our 287 sites as well. Our itinerant division is composed of different subunits, if you will, when I was talking about the program leads. So in the area of deaf, hard of hearing, we have deaf, hard of hearing teachers, audiologists, and ASL interpreters. Within the group of blind and low vision, we have blind, low vision teachers, orientation, mobility, and materials production, which includes magnification. It includes our 2 braillists as well. We have occupational therapy services, speech and language services, our Nexus team, which does a lot of connective work with our member districts, physical health disability teachers. Also, we have physical therapists, and that composes kind of the flower that makes us our division. And what I love about this graphic is that we overlap with each other. And it's that integratedness is where we have that power. We have, as you can see, kind of the rows of this table are each one of those flower petals, if you will, and how many of each group and how many buildings we are in. We go far and we go wide. And it's really exciting, really exciting. So as Amanda and I have worked with the itinerant team, we really have had this eye on multiplying impact. And what does that mean to multiply impact? So the traditional model of itinerant service delivery is that we provide skills to a student, and then they learn to apply those skills in that environment. We teach self-advocacy, we teach compensatory skills. You learn as a deaf, hard of hearing student, I should sit in the front, I should wear my cochlear implant, I should, right? The eye that we have for itinerant is this multiplier impact service provision. So we provide coordinated services with the IEP team to accelerate the outcomes across domains. So it's not just giving one student skills and hoping they can apply it. It's, okay, case manager, okay, what does this look like in your environment? Okay, speech and language pathologist, how can you weave in to this work? Okay, occupational therapist, how can we as adults organize ourselves to help leverage not only the student's growth, but help leverage that environment to be inclusive to the student? It's that wraparound support that as adults we organize, we can do stronger work for kids. So our itinerant professional development has primed for that impact multiplier model. So one of the examples that we want to highlight today is we worked with the itinerant team on teaching the 5 pillars of literacy. And traditionally, the 5 pillars has often been viewed, and when we began with the team, of the responsibility of the classroom teacher or the special education case manager, because they teach literacy, right? Their job is to teach literacy. And so we worked with the team and we wondered, what if that's a fallacy? What if it's a fallacy that one person is responsible for literacy? What if the responsibility is shared? And what would that look like? So the question that we worked through with the group was, how might we as an itinerant division create these multiplier conditions to increase student literacy uptake? How can, in that inclusive way, we all hold that weight of literacy? It's not just the classroom teacher, it's not only the case manager, but we all have that weight to share. And how do we share that weight in intentional ways? So we work to tie that connective thread, tie that knot between literacy and itinerant services. And in some ways, and in some groups, that was an easy knot to tie. Deaf, hard of hearing teachers may provide direct literacy instruction, and we have our direct tie. A physical therapist and literacy instruction is a bigger bridge. And so we had to figure out, how do we bridge this bigger divide? When it's a smaller bridge, it's easier to make that connective tie, but when it's a bigger bridge, it's harder. So we had to think about, well, what is that intersection? What is that bridge? So we moved through 3 steps. First was, as a service provider, I play an important role in students' literacy growth and promoting literacy access. That concept of literacy access really rang true with this group. Because as a physical therapist, you're creating conditions where a student can sit in a comfortable way, well supported for literacy access. As an audiologist, you may be programming hearing aids in which it's increasing literacy access. So that concept of access really rang true. So we looked at, what are the access demands of different literacy instruction? What are the sensory demands, the listening, the viewing demands? What are the motoric demands? What do you have to do with your hands? What are the linguistic demands? How complex is the language used? And then what would be needed for them to have full access? And what accommodations are in place to promote that full access? And how do we know if the accommodations are insufficient? And then how do we respond? The second step was, I can integrate literacy learning into my lessons. So what specific skills do you teach to help students increase their literacy instruction? So how do you integrate literacy into what you're doing? what vocabulary is important to your group that you would want a student to be able to read, write, and know. So physical therapists, we maybe have the word sit, stand, left, right. Let's have some cards that say sit, stand, left, right. Let's read them, right? Let's pull that together in intentional ways. And next, I can engage in collaborative efforts to multiply my impact. So how might I serve as that multiplier to not only me be able to know knowledge, but transfer that knowledge in effective ways and in affirming ways, not as me as the expert and you as the unknowing. It's us collaboratively thinking, what do you know? I know, how can we work together to increase literacy access? And also, how do we ensure that the student has consistent and reliable literacy access throughout the day with our collaboration? So it's not spotty. I have access in science, but not in math. Then I go to this teacher and then I don't have access again. How do we ensure that the whole day we have access? So the way we started to think about it collaboratively with the team, and you can see itinerant, it's complex. And that's kind of what we love about it. It's a challenge, it's a nut to crack, and that makes us excited. It does, I can't lie. And so here we have on the bottom, we have access demands. So what is the access needs? What accommodations are in place? And how do my services well position the student for literacy access? So we worked as a team. We had each table group fill out a Google form. They looked at each other. We reported out together to learn from each other. Then we talked about the variable of direct service provision, when you're with a student one-on-one learning a discrete skill, and indirect service provision when you're engaging in those collaborative opportunities. And how do we leverage both? So just to provide an example of how we navigated, we looked through each of the pillars. One of the pillars that we spent our beginning amount of time on is phonemic awareness. And we use the activity of sound boxes. And this would be, a student would have this grid, and a teacher may say the word cat, and the student would have little pegs or little circle chips per se, and they would move it into the sound box, at, cat, right? It's ability to listen to the parts of a word, break it out into its parts. So we watched a video of phonemic awareness, and we had each group look at what are the access demands? What do we have to know, be able to do visually? What do we need to do in all of those access elements? And then within each group, we had them move through these different steps. So I play an important role in a student's literacy growth. So let's say, for our example, a student with a physical disability. We would have to look at the motoric demands. They have to move little chips into these boxes. Well, there's that motoric demand. If they're struggling with the motoric demand, it increases their cognitive load, because if they're slower moving it in, they have to hold those letters in there longer. It increases the complexity of the task just due to the motoric challenge. So first, to identify that is the motoric demand, and then how does a student move pieces? Could they move pieces in a different way, or what accommodations are needed for them to be successful with that task? Next, that they can integrate literacy into their lessons. So I just use that example about stand, sit, left, right. How can I use, if the word is cat, how can I integrate that into, do you have at home, do you have a cat? What do we do? Do you move to the cat? Do you go, right? How can we start looking at those words that we use? And then how can I engage in those collaborative efforts to multiply impact? So how can I, as a teacher, get ahead of what the student's going to learn and identify what are those access demands next week, tomorrow, in 2 weeks? How can I get ahead of it, figure out, make sure those accommodations of the IEP are in place and will be functioning? And then how do I check in? Yes, we are making that literacy progress that we need. So that joint partnership is so critical for us. So today we've moved through the core values and foundational beliefs of the itinerant services. We outline the scope of services, and then we discuss that connective thread of how we are intentionally working through and integrating literacy into our work. So now we want to transition to see what reflections or wonderings or questions you may have for Amanda and I.
Thank you. And before we even go to that, this is just like a wonderful place to point out in front of each one of us is time to go even deeper into itinerant services on Tuesday, December 5th at 9 a.m. here. It just is a perfect way to take what you have shared with us tonight and learn even more. So I wanted to make sure that I said that right away, and now would love to open it up for reflections, wonderings, or questions.
It's almost like that was planned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I wanted to thank you and your staff. I mean, in 1 hour here, I've learned so much. And I'm excited because it's there. The excitement is right in front of us. And I'm so happy that our students have people like you. I'm gonna cry. It's just so moving. It really, really is. Such important work. So thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Meg. And everyone.
Michael.
Wow is just sort of one, like captures everything. Amazing. I'm curious, given the number of students that you said we're servicing in all the places and all the things, help me understand operationally, how on earth, with the few people that you have, how you're able to get to all of our 12 districts, including 287 sites, to do all those things and meet the needs of the students. Like that, my brain is on tilt about how that is accomplished. So I don't need a long explanation. I know that it is getting accomplished, but like that just seems like an entirely challenging thing to be successful with. But you're figuring it out, and so that's kudos to you. But can you just give us a little bit more color on that?
Absolutely. So when I began with the itinerant division, I felt the same way. It's like, how do we even do this? Right? And a lovely component that we have is because we work in subgroups. We have our program facilitators. Essentially, we take the referrals that we receive, and we have essentially a master caseload grid for each one of those divisions. So we have each one of our groups, let's say blind, visually impaired, has all the students. And then we think about geography, right, to reduce driving time. We think about need, and we think about student complexity. So some students have higher level of service, some students have a lower level of service. So they all have critical needs. And so we map out kind of based using a caseload grid, using weighting, looking at IEP services, using ratios, a lot of different kind of mathematical metrics to help us organize. And, first we're leveraging geography, we're using past partnerships, we're using student need, and kind of using different equations and modeling to see, could this work? You'll see kind of at the beginning of the year, it's, okay, we could run this model or this model or this model. What would make sense and meet every student's needs? And then we are also flexible as the year goes on, because there are times where we have high levels of referral from one district and less from a different district. And so it starts to misbalance us. And so then we have to think, we have to make sure we have high quality services for each. So how do we rebalance to make sure every student's need is being met? And so those are some of the ways that we organize ourselves to make sure that we have the best service we can provide.
And if I can add to
Please
that as
do.
well, yeah, the other piece of it is we have an amazing team that really understands the work really well. And so I think Elizabeth shared just kind of our team at the beginning of our slide deck. And I can't give enough kudos to our full team, because it really takes a full team to pull together the full operation. And Elizabeth has been a great lead for us as well. And so I think if you were to talk to our staff, they would really give a shout out to Elizabeth and her leadership for that team.
Superintendent Dowd, as she was describing all of that, what do you think came to my mind? Right, the things that we've got to today, right?
Right.
That if there ever is a model, right, that one could possibly play around with, right, with technology, that's sort of
Yeah,
seems telling to me.
we were in a conference today around AI. And so maybe one day
This could bring
AI
AI,
could,
actually.
this, I would say, I don't know.
I mean, we already have AI with Dr. Lamb.
We
We're-
pretty
we're doing
much
it
have.
for us.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
uh, Yeah,
It was a good discussion.
yeah.
Shannon, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story with us. And that statement of the slide where you said that deafness is the inability to hear has changed me. So thank you for that.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
I am seriously curious as to what your doctoral thesis was about. In your presentation today. I mean, you don't have to answer. This is a rhetorical question.
Well, I could, but
Yeah, no,
I
I'm
could
just
give you a
saying,
short version.
I'm fascinated by including the story that you just referred to. And very impressive. Very, very impressive. It seems like we're incredibly lucky to have you.
I'm very lucky to be with this team, and being able to work with Amanda. I was so lucky to join such a winning team. So I'm very fortunate.
When I said that we were going to build on the strategic plan update with this, I actually didn't realize just how well that it was going to build on it. And I do think that everything that you shared, from your story to the values to the details of the work that you do and how you do it, I think is actually a really beautiful illustration of what came before your presentation of what we're striving to do. And so I think that it was a really beautiful pairing. And so appreciate you for, I think, helping make that real for us in some really important ways. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you Catherine's sister?
I am. I am indeed.
My kids both had Dr. Lam's sister for 5th grade, so
Education runs deep in my family.
very deep.
Wow.
Very deep.
Okay.
Mhm.
I love it. We're making connections across the UK. Neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah, my kids go to St. Louis Park, so it's a nice connection here.
That's great.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you
Lovely.
so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us.
Thank you.
tonight. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. We do not have anything in the business services and labor relations report this evening. So we'll move on to board business. The first item is following up on our last meeting by Mr. D, which is changes to the board officers and operations policy bucket. Just again, as a recap, what we talked about were changes to our bylaws, adding in required policies and removing a couple of outdated policies. So before we would entertain action to actually approve those changes, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I shared last board meeting, our ad hoc committee has been actively working. And this is the second reading of the bylaws and required policies. And just as a summary, we agreed to follow MSBA required policies. Those non-required, we would be eliminating them and either putting them in language of our bylaws and or into a procedure. And so tonight before you is the second reading of the updated bylaws. It also is the elimination of, due to non-mandated policies, elimination of BOO 100, which is our goals, BOO 120, board superintendent relations, BOO 140, compensation policy, BOO 220, board structure and decision-making, and BOO 240, conflict of interest. All of the language in those eliminated policies have been added to the bylaws. The next one is the approval of second reading of policy 214, out of state travel. And policy 102, equal equity opportunity. And then the last eliminations are under the COVID policies. These policies are being eliminated due to, and being moved into procedures to allow for the flexibility of any kind of requirements around our current policy around face covering and quarantine. And so that is the summary of the second reading.
Thank you. And neither the superintendent nor I believe any members of the policy ad hoc committee got concerns or feedback after our last discussion. So we are bringing this forward this evening with the recommendation to approve the changes as presented. And we can move them as a slate. The recommended action that you see in the packet is to approve the board officers and operations policy bucket as presented. So we could do that in one motion. But first want to pause and see if there are any questions or comments.
Did just
Go
have
ahead.
one
Yeah.
question about, since these policies are being moved to the bylaws and or procedures, I'm wondering, are those ever up for review or being looked at, or is it kind of where it'll never see the light of day?
Again,
Is the question I'm asking.
Go ahead.
all of the eliminated policies that are directed to the board have been updated in the bylaws. There are no procedures. And that will be on the 3-year revision cycle. The policy regarding COVID-19 face covering quarantine, that's an annual procedural review through our SIT, our implementation team of leaders. And so they'll do an annual review. It's recommendations coming from our health and safety recommendations from DHS, and they'll go through a leadership committee internally.
Yes, we have seen in the ad hoc committee a very impressive large calendar, which gives me a lot of confidence that there will be a very clear system and timeline of review to make sure that we're on the right cycle for all of these. Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Kim.
Just a procedural question.
Yeah.
I don't know, because bylaws are sort of a thing. It might be a good idea.
THANG.
Yeah, to move to,
Do the bylaws separately.
yes.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do all the policy changes in
Yeah.
one fell swoop, but it's probably good to have a separate motion and vote on bylaw changes.
I think we can do that. With that, we could entertain a motion to approve the bylaws as
I will move
presented.
to approve the bylaws as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ann Casey and a second by Kim Ross. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the changes to the bylaws are approved. So then we can entertain the remaining items with the changes to the board officers and operations policy bucket as presented.
So moved.
We have a motion by Shannon Andreessen and a second by Heidi Marty. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the motion passes. This is a big step, everybody. All right.
Thank you, committee.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say special shout out to the superintendent and the other members of the ad hoc committee on the full-time staff who have done a lot of work on this. Thanks to all of you. So moving into the other board report items, I'm gonna share a couple of announcements, and then as you've no doubt seen, we have a closed session this evening. So we will entertain a motion to move into closed session. We'll take a brief pause while everybody else gets to go home for the night. For the AMSD report, I just, the superintendent and Michael just referenced the annual conference was today, and I think we actually had a quorum of the 287 school board there. I think there were 7 of us who were able to be there throughout the course of the day. And lots of interesting discussion. And if people want to talk more about that, I certainly encourage them to share in the Once Around the Table here in just a moment. On the calendar front, we have already talked about, but I'll put in another plug for the Get on the Bus, which is going to be here at the District Service Center on December 5th from 9 to 11. Please make sure you let Juanine know if you and any guests from your member district are able to attend. The next lunch between the board and members of our local 2209 is on Tuesday, December 12th at 1:00 p.m. upstairs in room 316. And there is also a virtual option. So again, please just let Juanine know if you plan to attend.
What was that date?
That is Tuesday, December 12th at 1 p.m. And then the one other thing I wanted to note is the annual leadership conference for the Minnesota School Boards Association is January 11th and 12th. And if you would like to attend as a intermediate District 287 school board member, please let Juanine know so that she can get you registered to attend on behalf of our district. With that, think we will move to once around the table, which is just time for board members to share anything that they would like to share with each other or with anybody that's present or watching.
Well, I'll
Please,
go.
yeah.
Just, there were elections and Hopkins filled 4 seats. And I know there were other elections in our member districts. So just wanted to congratulate everyone and looking forward to another 4 years.
Congratulations. Congratulations to several of you. That's right. Yep. Go ahead.
I would just say again that today's conference, mostly about AI, but also just about, how we look at technology and how there's other uses out there. It really blew me away at what I did not know. It's still in its nascent stage in education, but we have some amazing districts like Bloomington that are already on the cusp of being ahead of the game on that. But if we're not talking about it, not only here in 287, but especially at our home districts, we will be sooner than you realize. And so the idea of getting us more understanding of what it is and the implications of it, a lot of great opportunities. There are some pitfalls as well. I think this is one of those transformational things that's going to fundamentally alter the landscape of what we're doing, not just in education, but in everything. And that blew me away. So I no longer feel like I'm in the dark on that. And that's both awesome and scary at the same time.
I was just gonna put it, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say thanks to
Yes, that's what I was gonna
287's
do.
very own John
Yeah.
Fila. who was
Yes.
the presenter.
Excellent. He was phenomenal.
He actually helped a lot of my personal anxiety around a lot of this by helping me, I think, more center on the idea. This is not something to be scared of, and it's also not something to think about through a punitive or a negative lens, which I think tends to be perhaps how I have been seeing it or thinking about it, or just like absorbing it through things. And I think he had some really important things to say that I hope were helpful for all of the educators in the room, as well as for me personally on that front.
I think the one other thing real quick is that one comment that was brought up was about policy and about, well, where are we going with policy and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's changing so much that whatever you might want to try to do from a policy standpoint will be so old by the time you get to it. So that's both an opportunity and a concern as to how do we, I don't want to say regulate it, but more of understand its proper placement. So I thought that that was another kind of cornerstone question that was left to the masses to be contemplating.
Go ahead, Kim.
So I was just gonna piggyback on, last week in Eden Prairie, there was actually a panel discussion that was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce in conjunction, and it was held at the middle school and the Performing Arts Center. And there was someone from our district on the panel. There was an analyst from Gartner Group, which is like the 800-pound gorilla in terms of IT deep thoughts in corporate America, and a couple other folks. And so, I would just throw out there, it was really good, but it was really a good way to start the community conversation, right? So, I would just encourage to look for those opportunities in your own communities, because like one of the things the analyst from Gartner said was like, if y'all text, you're using AI already,
Yes.
right? When it suggests what the next word is or whatever. And the genie is out of the bottle. So now, and the other thing around policy is some of the concerns around AI when it comes to plagiarism and those kinds of things, that's already in handbooks. How we implement now and and detect when somebody used AI. But like, I've been playing around with Chat GPT, and if I wrote something, said, make this more compelling to this audience. If somebody read that, they would go, you didn't write this because you would never use that word, right? And so, it's changing a lot, but it's fascinating. I think, there are opportunities for it to be leveraged, especially in education, positively. And the ed tech vendors will figure all that out. They really will. I mean, that's their job. We were having a conversation at the board table about it because we have one board member who's very, very interested. And he's like, we have to talk about this. It's like, who was talking about how the personal computer was going to be used in education in the 80s? And I turned to him and I'm like, Apple, they like built their business on it, so it's like, there's lots of people smarter than us that are,
I think it was really
or
important.
me.
Part of the presentation, I think it was in Bloomington's presentation today, was talking about where the AI is not a monolithic thing.
No.
AI, there's all sorts of elements of AI. What's really this true thing is this generative AI, which is what Chat GPT and these elements are, which is taking it on to a whole nother level. And at the same time, John, I think, talked about it in his presentation to where the one comment that I've heard multiple times today was generative AI today is as dumb as it will ever be.
Yeah.
And as bad as it will ever be is today. Tomorrow, it gets one more day smarter and it will just keep exponentially growing from that. That was both kind of cool and scary all at the same time, but it's that kind of recognition that I think is important to then figure out, like you're saying, Kim, all these are, and it's interesting that you're saying that Eden Prairie had that. I'm saying like in Edina, that has not, I haven't yet to hear in the business community, in the civic community, in the whatever part of the community, that hasn't been there. But I think you're absolutely right. This is the way to start that process of bringing the community at large in before it becomes this boogeyman, getting some context around it to go from there.
What people are afraid of is sentient AI, right? The robots are going to start to think for themselves. It's like, whatever. But I also, before we get off this topic, I want to give a shout out to Nick Kramer, who's the principal of Eden Prairie Online of that school, who did a presentation at the conference.
Well, and you also had 2 high school students
Yes, you
who
did.
spoke on the panel in front of
Yes.
the entire group.
There you go.
And with that, I am going to change subjects and share.
Very nice.
This was
No, you
from
get a picture of that, right? So you can post it
family
and all that
night
stuff?
at North Education Center this evening. Our superintendent also has a craft that she made. Would you like to?
Yes.
Oh, you
I
guys
love to
made
read.
these.
Nice.
We made these crafts tonight.
them. Oh, how nice.
So thank you to the North Education Center for
on you.
the eyes really jumped out for inviting us, and just it was really wonderful, and I highly encourage you to sign up if you're ever able to make it, as these invitations come our way over email in Marcy's Friday letter. I'm very excited to be able to take this one home with me. So thank you to the team at North for a great night. With that, I'm going to take this off before we move into closed session because I just can't psychologically manage that. We could, one last announcement actually before we go, which is just that we have one more meeting in the year 2023, and that is December 14th. So just wanted to note that that is our next meeting date and our last meeting of the year. With that, we could entertain a motion to go into closed session to consider a strategy for labor negotiations as allowed by Minnesota Statute 13D.03. Is there a motion to do so?
Second.
We have a motion by Ruthie Dallas and a second by Ann Casey. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. At 7:59, we will move into closed session. Thank you, everybody.